Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today we're going to talk about a technique that catches really big cold water largemouth bass. It is not necessarily an approach to catch a lot of numbers, but this is something that I have found to be very good for years now. It's something that my dad and I stumbled upon when I was a kid. You know, we used to go out and throw these guys all over the place. Some of you may recognize that. That's the Rapala shallow fat wrap. And this was a really good bait for us year round. But what we found was that during the coldest water period, so I'm generally talking November, December, you know, up in my neck of the woods, where we started fishing this was northern Illinois and northern Indiana. You know, we would freeze over generally around Thanksgiving, December-ish, and that's the same thing that we have up here in Wisconsin, usually a little earlier than that. But for that period before we freeze over, your bigger, fatter baits like this worked as a wake bait on the surface can be very, very good. Now, there's a couple of key things to this technique. First and foremost, you're looking to fish areas that are going to be absorbing heat. So you're not going to be just going out fishing this down a 45-degree bank. That's not necessarily what you're looking for. Usually what it is that you're looking for are areas that are going to be about 4 foot of water or less. Generally, clearer water works better. You want at least a couple feet of visibility, and you want to work this bait over objects and around objects that are going to absorb heat. So maybe you've got some stumps in a shallow flat. Maybe you're working an old pad field. The pads have since died out and you're fishing a dark bottom bay. The areas that are absorbing heat and you know, are retaining water temperatures that might be slightly warmer than areas that are a little bit deeper and maybe you've cooled off more. So if you've got a nice sunny day, you don't necessarily need air temperatures that are really high for the day, but if you've got a nice sunny day, usually calmer wind conditions, a bait like this, and I've got several others that I want to share with you that I've had really good success with doing this, can be phenomenally good at generating strikes. Now, there's a couple of keys to the baits that you want to choose. So I'll mention the couple of baits that I've done really well on. One, the shallow floating Rapala fat wrap. The shallow running, if I can get it undone, the Strike King shallow running, the 1.5. Any of the KVD kind of the shallow runners work really well. I actually like bigger profiles for these baits. This is the Strike King Hybrid Hunter, the shallow runner preferably. And then just some of the old balsa. This is the Bagley Balsa 2. Again, a high floating square bill style bait. I like a bigger profile. I like baits that are going to push water. And this is one of the keys. It needs to push water and have movement at the slowest speed possible. All of these baits, when you throw them out, you're going to retrieve this bait as slow as you possibly can. You need it to stay on the surface and you want it to go side to side. You want it to have wiggling motion. A lot of baits that I've tried at the absolute slowest speed you can run it, the baits don't actually have movement. They just kind of pull towards the angler that's using it. I want to be able to work this really slow, like as slow as you possibly can, and still have the bait moving. That's one of the keys to this technique. You really don't want to pull it too fast. You want to keep the bait at the water surface level. It can be slightly under the surface, but it still needs to be pushing water, if that makes sense. You need to see the V wake from your bait. You're really fishing these all as a wake bait. But I can't stress how important it is to fish these as slow as possible. You know, I think one of the reasons we stumbled upon it is just we were out fishing and our hands were cold. So you would retrieve it, you know, and maybe you'd stop it to kind of blow on your hands and warm your hands up, and then you'd start going again. And what we found was the slower we work the bait, the more bites we get. And to this day, it's worked. This was 30 years ago at this point. It's something I do every really, you know, late fall, early winter. It generates a lot of strikes, and I've caught some of the biggest bass, some of the biggest northern bass of my life have been caught doing this. But it's critical to find a bait that will actually push water and wiggle at really slow speeds. So a couple other things too to keep in mind. Fluorocarbon's not necessarily what you want for this technique. The fluorocarbon tends to want to pull the bait down. Monofilament works really good. Even your braided line works really good. And the one reason I don't mind using braided line for this technique is the bait is being retrieved so slow, and you generally always see the bite. Now, they don't necessarily like break the surface like you would expect from a topwater bite. The bait will actually just flush and get sucked under. But because you actually see the bite and you're working the bait so slow, the stretch in your braided line, you can easily manipulate by setting the hook a little bit slower, setting the hook not as hard. You just don't, you can take advantage of the ability of the braided line to float, and you're not going to like have the negatives that you would get normally fishing a crankbait on braided line. So I generally fish it on monofilament, but I also will occasionally throw it on braided line sometimes. Those are a couple of keys. The other thing you can do is drop down in a gear ratio reel to a very slow ratio reel. This is one of the few techniques where I actually will use like a 5-speed gear ratio reel sometimes. And it's critical just to not set the hook too hard and too fast. What you will find a lot of times with this technique too is the fish will show themselves before they actually commit to it. And it's not necessarily like a topwater bite in the summer where you'll see a fish come up and like swirl under it, and then you work the bait 10 more feet and then they blow up on the bait. It's actually more like you slowly see them pull up behind the bait, and eventually they're so tantalized by the slow moving action of the bait that they eventually end up biting it. And a lot of times when they bite it, they just pull the bait under. Like it's almost like watching a bobber just sink. So it's an interesting way to fish. You're not going to probably pull up into an area and catch 50 fish in a day. This is a technique that is good at generating strikes from the fish that are still up shallow, cruising some of those dark bottom bays looking for some warmth. It's really good in like your marshy type areas where you had a lot of pads, you know, maybe a stump field, things like that. And it's just a fun, easy way to fish. It does not require anything more than just keeping your bait slowly wiggling on the surface. Like it's just an easy thing to do when it's really cold out and your hands are cold, and it's good at generating some very, very big bites from largemouth in those areas. So I thought I'd share it with you. I've talked a little bit about this technique over the years of doing YouTube. Man, all of these baits are really good, and I would love to hear from you guys. Is anyone doing a similar thing? Because this is something that I know is kind of an underground technique, but not a lot of anglers do it. And I think more so it's just because there really aren't that many anglers on the water still fishing during that time of year, this time of year, especially up in my neck of the woods. Everyone has kind of switched over to going out in the woods, chasing deer. I'm totally cool with that. It gives me the lakes to myself, and this is one of the techniques that you should try. Hopefully you enjoyed today's video. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned, we'll have a new video coming out tomorrow.